Good afternoon, or morning, or whatever time it is you're actually watching this video. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm not by a fish tank, I'm at the dining room table by my palm tree. I've got a bundle of cameras in front of me. And this is what I'm going to be talking about today, is fish photography. So a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, a few people on Instagram ask on DMs and comments on my pictures how I actually capture those fish. Because some of them are quite small, fast moving, and I know as better than anyone how difficult and infuriating it is that the fish always end up a bit blurry and not as crisp as you'd like. So I'm going to be talking a bit about fish photography, basically. DSLR cameras, phone cameras, lenses, some different settings you can adjust on a DSLR, and then some more fish specific tips that I find useful. So I hope you enjoy the video and hopefully you gain something to improve your photography, and then you can come back and share your fish photos with us and we'll all get to enjoy what you see every day. So about 10 years ago, I brought my first DSLR camera, and it was this one here that I've got still today. Up until this year, it's what I've been using for all my photos. I've just made a few tweaks along the way to improve the images that I take. And then I got a new, the old one was a Canon 400D, I then upgraded to a 1300D, still Canon. Two main reasons for that was this one can do videos, which the previous one couldn't. Again, as you know, you're watching it, I've started a YouTube channel and taken some better quality images using a DSLR, or videos using a DSLR camera will hopefully improve the content I can provide you all. But also it can transfer the photos that I take directly to my phone over the Wi-Fi, rather than having to go through an annoying step of transferring them to the laptop or computer and then sending them across to my phone. So I'm saving time, which means I can get photos processed a bit quicker, which is really helpful when you don't really have enough time to be taking photos anyway, let alone processing them. So that's why I've made the upgrade. The actual image quality is a little better, but minimal. So yeah, you don't, basically the reason I'm saying this is you don't have to spend loads of money for the latest gadgets. Both of mine were second hand, and actually I would be still taking good quality images with the old one, which I paid 150 quid 10 years ago. It was really quite cheap and not a huge outlay. So, and that's important because this is a hobby for us, and we're just sharing images with our friends online. I'm not making money from them, I'm not entering contests. It's just a passion and enjoyment for me to take these images and to share them online so I can always go back and have a look at them. That's why I started my Instagram in the first place. It wasn't to build a following or anything like that. It was just to have a store of photos of my fish so I can look back and see how far my hobbies come. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about a few settings that I find really important when taking images of fish. So the first one is your shutter speed. So again, firstly, it's important to know how to alter your shutter speed. So on your camera, you can swap it from the auto setting to shutter speed priority, which is TV. This gives you the ability to adjust your shutter speeds. So once you're on shutter priority, you can then just use the little dial at the top and roll it forward and back to adjust your shutter speed. And it'll be displayed as a length of time, which is generally 1/10, 1/20 of a second, let's say. And what that is how quickly the shutters on your lens close to take the still image that you're trying to take. The longer it's open, the more chance you've got for movement to happen in the shot and therefore cause a blur. So the much quicker, I generally shoot about 1/200th, 1/250th, and that's really nice and quick, and basically means that the fish doesn't have a chance to move at all in that time, so even the fins stay nice and crisp and clear. But this comes at a cost. What happens is when you're not letting so much light in because your shutters are closing so quickly, you get a much darker image and you need to offset that by altering another setting. So in dimly lit tanks, or most fish tanks, the lighting won't be so bright that you can shoot at 1/200th of a second without some additional lighting. So I'll explain what I mean by additional lighting later on when I talk about sort of the added extras you can add on to a DSLR camera. But first I want to talk about another camera setting which also has an influence on the brightness of your image, and that's called aperture.
And you can change your camera settings to aperture priority, and that allows you to adjust the aperture.
So cameras work quite similar to how our human eye works, in that the aperture is very similar to the pupil, and there's a sensor in the back of the camera which is a bit like the retina of the eye. And the aperture is there to control the amount of light getting to the sensor. The pupil is there to control the amount of light getting to the retina. The wider the aperture or the pupil is, the more light is allowed in. And now this is quite handy and works in tandem with the shutter speed, because that also limits the amount of light that can get in. But that's based on length of time it's exposed for with that shutter open, rather than the width of the opening. The two settings I've already showed you, the shutter priority or the aperture priority, they only let you alter one of those settings because the camera will balance the other one to compensate. So if you're opening up that aperture really wide, the camera will increase your shutter speed to let less light in that way, so it balances and you get the right light exposure on the sensor, so then you get a correctly exposed image, not an overexposed or underexposed image.
So here you can see I'm on the aperture priority with the AV, and just like on the shutter speed, you can use this dial up the top, and you can see the F number is changing, and that is making the aperture slightly smaller every time I roll it through. I typically shoot down around 5.6, 5, somewhere around this area, depending on what effect I want with the picture.
The aperture also has another influence on your image. It's not just all about the exposure. So you'll often see images where the background or the foreground is really nicely blurred out, which focuses all the attention on the actual subject of that photo. For us, it will be the fish, where all the background plants, the foreground, the botanicals, the sand, whatever it is that's in your aquarium, it's just nicely blurred out and gives a nice background of mottled colours rather than anything that's going to catch your attention. But that fish in the middle, or just offset from the middle, is nice and crisp and sharp in focus. This is controlled by the aperture, and a wider aperture will blur out more of the background. Basically what it means is a wide aperture has a narrow depth of field, which means a very small part of the image is going to be in focus, and anything outside of that range will be blurred. And the further away from that image you get, the more blurred it will be. So it gets that nice sort of radial blurring where it gets more and more blurred the further you get to the corners. The narrower the aperture, the less light you're going to be getting in, but you increase the depth of field that you have, so more of your image is going to be in focus. Now that's really important for when you're taking full tank shots, full landscape type style photos, where you want the whole image or as much of the image to be nice and crisp and sharp. So I've talked about those two different modes of shooting, which gives the camera some sort of say in how that image is exposed. There's one final way that I'd like to talk about, and that is the manual
mode, which again is right at the top of the dial, normally under an M.
This gives you full control over both the shutter speed and the aperture, but you have to know how to balance that image. So it does take a few images under new lighting to work out what the correct balance is. The reason for that being important is that once you add additional lighting sources, such as a flash gun, which I'll talk about later, you are introducing a light source which the camera doesn't expect because it's not currently hitting the sensor when you're focusing. When that flash goes off, it's going to overexpose that image and look completely wrong. Whereas you can adjust your settings knowing that the flash is going to go off, and not take you a few attempts, but eventually you'll dial in that shutter speed and aperture balance with the flash brightness and get a good quality image. This is something that is probably more advanced and isn't somewhere I would start off with. I would definitely start off with just adjusting either the aperture or the shutter, depending on what's more important to you. But slowly, when you've got the time, have a play around with the manual settings and learn how the balance is found. It's going to give you a better understanding of photography in general as well. And then there's one more thing that's going to impact the brightness of your image. Well, two when you count the flash, but we're not going to talk about that just yet. We're going to talk about the ISO. And this is effectively the sensitivity of your light sensor to light.
And it's really easy to adjust. You just click on the ISO button and then you can just choose the number that you want. The higher the ISO, the brighter your lighting is going to be. So when the ISO is doubled, the brightness is doubled.
As you increase the ISO setting on your camera the quality of your image is going to decrease. I'm sure you would have seen sort of those images taken at night under a phone, and they're really quite a grainy, poor quality image. The same happens when you overexpose your camera in terms of ISO. You're going to get far better quality images at the lower end of the ISOs. The best quality image is always going to be at the lowest number, which is your base ISO. For my camera, that is 100, and I don't always use that. I sometimes go up to about 200, just because I don't need to have it at that really top quality image, because I'm generally just using these images for Instagram, and the quality is sort of decreased when it's uploaded anyway. Like I mentioned earlier, it's quite difficult to take those images at those really fast shutter speeds because they need so much light for it to work, because you're limiting the amount of light that's hitting that sensor. And the easiest way to counteract that, rather than adjusting the aperture and the ISO, is to get yourself an external flash gun. So I'm sure you've all had experience with getting your camera out and setting it up in front of the tank, taking a picture, and the flash automatically goes off because it's set to auto, and it thinks it's really dark, I need to flash. You get this big white glare across the glass and you can't see any of your fish anyway. That's going to happen if you use any flash in front of the glass, because it's a reflective surface and you just can't do it. Instead, what you can do is use a flash gun. You can mount it on a tripod and pop it in front of your tank. Lift up the tank lid and get it up above the tank. This way, the bright light from this flash is coming from the same direction as your tank aquarium lights and will not cause any glare on this front pane. You're just going to be illuminating your subject of the image. And this is how you can take really good, fast shutter speed images of your fish without the horrific glare you get when using a normal flash. To do this, you need a trigger. So I've got a receiver on the bottom of the flash, and my camera, which I left over at the table, had a trigger. So the trigger sends out I think it's a radio signal or a Bluetooth signal to the receiver, which tells the flash to fire when I press the take image button, the shutter button, I guess. So yeah, that's how it is done. I'm sure many of you would have been to public aquariums and seen all the signs saying no flash photography. And there's sort of a few reasons for that. One is that it doesn't work and you're just going to get glares all over the image and it's going to be ruined anyway. And the second one is it is going to stress out the fish a little bit. Flash is stressful, thunderstorms, stressful, lightning, I guess, lightning storms, but you know, these bright flashes of light do cause stress to animals that don't really understand what's going on. So it's important to remember to do this in short spells, take lots of breaks between batches of images. Don't every day take images with flash of your fish. Give them a decent chunk of time to recover from that stressor. It's unfair to just constantly put them under this stress. So the other thing you can do with cameras, not only is change the settings and the modes that you're shooting under, is change the lens that's attached to your camera. The camera body and the lens got separate entities and you can swap it over, which is really useful. I do believe, not my phone has one, but I do believe some of the more modern phones have multiple lenses or multiple cameras that you can select through, have a macro or a zoom, and that's really quite amazing. And there's also sorts of things like this, which is a clip-on macro lens. And I find this really quite useful for quick videos, close-ups of feeding or something like that. I really enjoyed taking a video of the knife fish using this one. But it's not so good for photography, and especially not so good for shy fish, which aren't right at the front of the aquarium. It just can't focus back that far. This one was Arca, the photo studio or something like that. And yeah, it does a good job. It's much better than my plain phone camera, but it doesn't quite hit the levels as a DSLR macro lens. So that's where I'll start first, is the DSLR macro lens, and that's the one that I've got attached to my 1300D. This is what I use for all my fish photography. It's really quite amazing, if I do say so myself. So macro lenses, they are designed for close-up photography effectively, which is exactly what we're doing with our fish. So a true macro lens has the ability to replicate the subject onto the image sensor or the camera sensor at a life size, so a 1-to-1 ratio. This means you get a lot of detail into the image. You can really see the delicate nature of the fins and the scales, and you can see the colours and the pupils of the eyes, and it's just yeah, I mean, that's what it's for, and it does a great job of it. You do get some non-true macro lenses, which are slightly less than actual size, so a 1:2, 1:4 ratio. They're still great, they still do a really good job and far better than any of the others, but they're not a true macro lens. A true macro lens is also always a prime lens, which is one of the next lenses I'm going to talk about. But you do get some zoom lenses, which is the third lens I'm going to talk about, which say macro on them, and that means that they are suitable for close-up photography, but are not a true macro lens. They're not to the same level that a macro lens would be. This wouldn't be suitable for full tank shots. If you're entering the IAPLC contests and you need a nice full tank shot, you're not going to get that from a macro lens. You'd want a different kind of lens, probably a zoom lens for that. But this is what you want for shrimp or fish or close-ups of plants, anything like that. So a zoom lens is sort of your standard lens. It's normally what comes with the camera body if you get a lens with one. It has an adjustable focal length. Aperture is adjustable. It's not superb at anything, but it's a good all-round lens. This is what I would use for full tank shots. I'm sure there are better lenses out there that I don't have. I don't do full tank shots, as I'm sure you're aware. I'm much more focused on the fish. So I've never really spent the money or learnt about zoom lenses in any way, really. So I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to spread any lies, but effectively, yeah, that's what they are. And it's what I use for full tank shots, but I could be wrong. And then finally, the one other lens I do have, again, this one actually came with my latest camera, so I didn't buy it, but I have looked into it because I've got a lens, I need to know what it does. And that's a prime lens. So what's special about a prime lens is that they don't have an adjustable aperture. They are set at a wide, oh, hey doggy, coming over, come on, come here, come here. Hello. You gotta come and say hello. Oh. Whoop, almost fell over. Here we go. So yeah, a prime lens doesn't have an adjustable aperture. It's set and it's... So a prime lens doesn't have an adjustable aperture. It is just set at a really wide aperture. So this one here is, what's the aperture on it? Or f1.8. So the lowest my macro goes to is about 2.6, I think it is. So this is wider than the macro lens is. And that is because these types of lenses are great for product shots. So what they are great for is really focusing on one subject and blurring everything else out. Like I said about apertures, the wider they are, the more blurred your foreground and background is, and it makes your product stand out or your subject stand out really well. They're not so suitable for close-up, so it'd be more for like a commercial style close-up of a bottle or a portrait of a dog, let's say. So yeah, that's what prime lenses are for. Again, I don't really use mine. I've got a macro lens which I can still get a nice blurred background but a better quality image for a fish.
So now let's focus on actually how we take images of fish. We've talked a lot about cameras and we haven't talked enough about fish for my channel. I've moved onto the sofa and I'm currently holding my phone. My tripod's back there because he wasn't very happy with me sat up at the table and wanted a lamp. So excuse the shaky footage and the very close up of my face. It's a big enough head as it is. It does not need to be this close to a camera. Something I'm sure none of you need to be made aware of, but I'm going to say it anyway for the fullness and completeness of this video, to make sure that your tank glass is free of algae. These little green spots or slight blurring from biofilms and algae will ruin your images. Get the pad, the scraper, whatever it is you use, and clean up that glass, and do it a long time before you take any images of your fish, because you don't want the floating particles that you cause in the water column when you are taking those photos. So you can see here the front pane of my clown killifish tank is covered with this fine dusting of algae. So it's important to give a good scrub and get rid of that, because you can't focus on anything behind. And while you're doing the front pane, you may as well do the back and sides as well.
So now the inside of the tank is nice and clean. Something I always forgot when I was first starting out taking photos was to clean the outside of the glass. Water drips down when you're doing maintenance and dries, leaving salt residue. You get dust and all sorts of things on the outside of your tank, and if you leave it there, again, you'll have distraction to the image, and you might even get a real bad sort of watermark right in front of the fish's eye, which is what you're focusing on, and it'll totally ruin the image and make it unusable. There's a few ways that you can clean it off. Obviously, there are specific glass cleaners out there that brands make which are fish safe. If you're going to use a glass cleaner that isn't fish safe, I'd always spray it on a cloth far away from the tank and then come across and wipe it. I generally just use water. You can use pure RO water, which won't leave any salt residue and will be absolutely fine. For my tanks, I have a squeegee that also has a clothy type thing on the back. That way I know that no chemicals that I don't want near my tanks is going to be on this cleaning product, the cleaning device, I guess. So I can use this to clean down and wet the front of the tank and then squeegee it down with the... Excuse the mess around here, it's just been dumped and left because I'm focused on getting the tanks done and doing this video, and I didn't have a chance to tidy up before I did it. Something else to say about fish photography is obviously every fish has its own personality. Some fish, like the knife fish down here, are nocturnal. So when I'm trying to take photos with the lights on, they're going to be hidden and away from view, and I'm not going to be able to do it. So excuse the glare, because I've got lights on in here, and it's quite difficult to take photos off, and I'll get to that in a second. But as you can see, the knife fish, they are actually about, because they know that this is about feeding time. But generally they wouldn't be out at this time, and I'd need to feed them to get them out. This works really well, and it means I can take images of the knife fish. So I'll just do that now. So in goes a whole load of frozen bloodworm, and shortly all the fish will come out. And I'll time lapse this bit.
For slow moving species like these knife fish and for nocturnal species, this method works really well, but you will get some sort of food and floating debris in the water column which will show up in your images. Which can be removed post-edit during editing, but obviously it's not ideal.
But not all species require to be fed for them to come out. Many of our species are happy to come out during the day and will act a lot calmer when food's not present. And when food hits the tank, they go into a feeding frenzy and it's impossible to focus on any one fish. Like my 6-banded barbs.
They actually didn't go too crazy this time, I think possibly because I gave them such a big live feed last night, so they're still not that bothered about the pellet feed. But you can still see that when they do want to swim quick, they really do. So composition of the photo is also actually quite important. You really want the eye of the fish or the head of the fish to be really in sharp focus and the rest of that body to be slightly blurred. You can see here in these examples that the images where the eye is nice, bright, and you can see it really clearly are the ones which you're immediately drawn to and are much more sort of pleasant looking images. This one here, however, the eye is in focus, but you've got a snail in the way and it's ruining the photo completely.
So when you're taking photographs as well, you always want to try and minimise reflections. In here, I don't have any natural light getting in once I shut the door, which is great, because that means I can take photos whenever during the day. Inside the house, I generally have to wait till night. The curtains and blinds don't do quite a good enough job keeping out that light, and I still get some reflections. So yeah, in here all I have to do is only turn on certain lights. It can plunge some tanks into darkness at the wrong time, so I generally try and do it before the lights come on at about midday, where I can. But as you can see the reflection of the tanks down to my right here, which is the Parasimonas linkii tank and a quarantine tank, and they're reflecting quite greatly into this Parasimonas tank here. So obviously I wouldn't at this stage be able to take any photos in this tank because it's just going to glare far too much. So yeah, it's all about sort of working out when and where to take your photos to minimise those reflections. You want to be sort of straight ahead of the tank as well. So right now the pictogram is right in front of me. I'm going to minimise reflections by taking photos from this angle rather than trying to take a photo from over here. I get a lot more glare coming across. Something else to consider is just like you would when you're aquascaping, the rule of thirds. So it really is, I believe it stemmed from photography rather than from aquascaping, and it's, you want what is your focal part of the image to be in one of those sort of areas of where the rule of thirds dictate. Cameras often have the grid lines, or at least you can turn the grid lines on and off on cameras, so you can very easily see where you should be positioning the fish within your picture. But again, in post, sort of in editing, you can crop the image to alter that to make sure that the image really is in those areas. It's not something I do too often. With Instagram, I find it creates too much background, especially if I'm positioning the eye of the fish in focus on the bottom left and the fish's body is to the left. It doesn't quite work. So generally the fish ends up quite central, and I try and position the head on one of the right hand sides if the fish's body is going to the left. But that's just the way I think it works. Instagram, if I was to do proper photography, I would potentially have a bit more background on show and have the fish more to the rule of thirds. But yeah, it's something that I don't think is overly important for what we're doing, or at least what I'm doing. But for real photography, you do want to sort of at least take into consideration the rule of thirds and not have your focal point dead center. So that was just the general sort of overview of the equipment I use and what's equipment available for fish photography, and why I personally choose to use a DSLR camera and a macro lens. Hopefully you found the tips and the information about the different settings on your camera a bit useful, and you can go away and practice and have fun taking images of your own fish. Please do send them over to me. I'd love to see them. Pop them in a DM or tag me in your post, so I can also have a look at how you're doing, because there's nothing greater than seeing other hobbyists enjoy their fish. So yeah, tag me in that. Oh, the pestograms are freaking out. Tag me in those. Comment any other tips you have in this video. Let me know so I can change mine. I'm always learning. Like I said, I'm not an expert. So let me know what you do and any tips you have for everyone. And then hopefully we've got this really nice big store of information about fish photography that anyone can come back and look at when they need to have a refresh, or they're just getting started in the hobby. Thanks for watching. If you've got this far, I'm not sure many of you will have done, but if you have, please do like and subscribe. It really helps get the video out there and will help make it worthwhile for me to make videos, I guess. Yeah, more to come.